Hello, everyone. Are you having fun at IWCON 2022? I am very curious to know how the event has been like for you. So, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let us know how much you're enjoying the talks. What are you finding the best part about the conference? Is it the networking, the lounges? Also, I want to remind you that this is a nice opportunity to brand yourself, to present your services or products if you have any in the networking space. Just you can just start a discussion, and the people from the community are always so supportive and so eager to learn as well. Uh, on that note, I would like to introduce you to our amazing sponsors who made this conference possible. Our diamond sponsors, Hackru, our platinum sponsors, Zero Point Security, Yes We Hack, and Patchain, and our gold sponsors, Saptang Labs, and all our amazing community partners who made it possible for us to do some cool giveaways of the passes. So, this talk is going to be about reading RFCs for hacking by Inti. If you are familiar of Intigriti, I'm sure you all have heard of Inti. He's super well known and super well respected in the Infosec community. And we are so happy at IWCon to present his talk to you on reading RFCs for hacking. Just a reminder that we have three giveaways on Pentester Lab Pro, Burp Bounty Pro, and cool IW swag. To participate, you just have to take a screenshot of IWCon screen, post it on Twitter, tag us, tag the speaker as well. And if you only want to participate for swag, then just use the hashtag IW swag. You can also ask your questions. This talk is going to be recorded because Inti is unwell, but Inti is going to come up later after the talk ends, and then Inti is going to answer your questions live. So you can drop your questions in the Q&A section as well. So without any further delay, just a moment. Yeah, let me start Inti's talk.
Welcome to my talk about RFCs. If you have no friggin' idea what RFCs actually mean, don't panic because that's exactly what we're going to discuss in the next 20 minutes or so. But not before I do a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Inti De Ceukelaire and I work as the head of hackers at Intigriti, which is, as you all know, the number one bug bounty platform. No jokes aside, please do sign up. It does help my KPIs. But so far, the commercial message, let's focus on my research now. I've been bug bounty hunting since 2011, and ever since, I think I reported over 3,000 vulnerabilities. Mostly concerning privacy, de-anonymization attacks, and then especially for web applications, I would usually dig into the email and ticketing systems. I do consider myself a live hacking event veteran. I love them. I love the competitive aspect, but also the fact that it just that you get to see so many people in public and that you get to share so much information and do research together. I wouldn't really consider myself an academic and never really went to university. But now, I like to do like some research, especially in-depth research on certain subjects and to share them with the world. And I guess this is one of them. And that is also something that my colleagues at live hacking events may say about me, is that I just simply like reading the documentation to do my own research. In fact, in the first hour of any live hacking event, I will usually not even open my computer, but I would rather just read the documentation and then also see what kind of underlying infrastructure the actual service that we are supposed to hack has. And if there's documentation about that, I will also gladly read it. And I think it's really underestimated how important this is. At least, from my own observations, I tend to find a lot of vulnerabilities that could have easily been discovered by simply reading the bugs. the docs, sorry, they give you a lot of edge cases, but also give some details about integrations. And it really helps you to think like a developer, like why they made certain choices, but especially also how they expect their users to behave. And if we go to the master of all documents, really the underlying documents of all other documents, we would come to the RFC. What is an RFC? It stands for request for comments, and it's basically whenever you have an ID, you can publish this as a request for comments, so everybody can give a comment. There's special formats on how to write an RFC. And whenever you publish this RFC, it will go or be evaluated by a task force, which is called the EITF. Now, there's a whole process to get your RFC officially published by them. We won't go too much into detail because that would kind of take us too far. But what you want to know is that RFCs have been around for a whole while. Actually, the first one was published in 1969. And also that these are not necessarily industry standards, because there's a various amount of RFCs that haven't really seen most of the World Wide Web, but are simply there and also just meant to be some edge cases, other more maybe experimental, informational, or also simply as a joke. One of my favorite joke RFCs are these, and they concern the IP transmission over area carriers, aka pigeons. I guess in the scenario that the world would come to an end, then we still have an RFC or a proposal on how we can finally communicate over pigeons. But some people were crazy enough to try this in 2001 in Norway. I guess they just released a bunch of pigeons with IP packets attached to their wings or something, and they found out that about less than half would actually make its destination, and it would take 50 to 100 minutes to get a response time back, which is not super great for a ping. So let us hope that the end of the world is not for tomorrow. But I just want to point out like the importance of this, because it even finds their ways, because it's an official RFC, it finds their ways to bug bounty guidelines. And this is a screenshot of Goldman Sachs guidelines, and they will officially ask you not to send over any pigeons that know how to sniff the traffic from their office. I guess that's a very complete bug bounty policy. I can only applaud this, but it kind of shows how there's like a lot of RFCs on various subjects, let's say, and that they shouldn't always be taken seriously. But some of these RFCs, they are rather obsolete now, yet we do use them every day. There's, for example, one RFC that states that a subdomain, or just a URL pointing to a document server, for example, to host HTTP documents or HTML documents, should start with www, which is already a long word to pronounce, let alone type every time. I think if we would just all omit the www from speech, but especially also from writing in URLs, we would live 10 years longer. But yeah, it is what it is. It was part of a request years ago of Tim Berners-Lee, and now we're still stuck with it. But even this guy, I mean, the guy who they say invented the internet, or would have been one of the creators of the internet, even he regrets some of this. I think he recently said in an interview actually that he's regretting, these two dashes right over here, because they don't really serve a purpose, and it just adds to the characters. But apparently that was just the way some programming syntax was done back then. But so you see, things that are obsolete now but invented years ago, they still make it to our current life every day. And I think this is a very good picture to kind of represent a modern digital infrastructure, It's built upon years and years and years of good ideas, but also maybe some questionable ideas or just ideas that are no longer really relevant. But it doesn't mean that all of these old standards or old RFCs are no longer present in our current technology. So knowledge of them can be quite important. What is interesting, however, is that some of these RFCs, even if they're not really known, they will disclose some security risks. But most developers, however, will not go and read the RFC of just everything that they're creating. So as a hacker, it kind of creates an opportunity window. So if you decide to read the RFCs, it may end up in some nice bugs. And sometimes it's just a given. Like if you would read the RFCs, most RFCs since a certain date, they require you to list security consideration, even if there's none. They require you to think about like, how can this possibly be abused? So whenever you're doing research on maybe a web or other component and trying to hack it, please do check out the security consideration section in the actual RFC. But also sometimes there's mistakes. I mean, humans make RFCs and humans also make mistakes. And sometimes it will happen that there's a crucial error in an RFC that people have already implemented, but needs to be adapted. So it can be very good to kind of get the errata of the RFCs and see what the difference is or how certain things were corrected, because some technology may still run on the first version of the actual RFCs. Something personally that I always tend to look for are the optional parameters or extensions that are disclosed in RFCs. Why? Because they may be very optional, like pointing to edge cases. Developer may still choose to implement them or support them, but they're like hidden. They're very often not really tested as part of a pen test, and they can be hidden treasure to customer data. I'm just going to start with a common RFC that you may have come across, or at least with the implementation of it, which is of course domain name. I mean, all the assets or most of the assets we'll have to test will contain a domain name. So here's my question to you, and feel free to answer in the comment. Is poneria.easy.edu, is this a valid, qualified, fully qualified domain name? Feel free to answer whatever you think. So the answer is actually no. Because according to RFC 1034, every port, so the subdomain, and then of course the root domain, which is IC, and then also the TLD, which is the last part, they would need a trailing dot at the end, because it signifies the end of that part, and it also counts for the last part. Now obviously you don't see this a lot, but it doesn't mean that it's no longer supported. For example, if you would go to Google and write a dot behind the .com, it will actually just continue to work. Interestingly, it will treat it as a totally different origin. So this may already lead to some interesting bugs. But yeah, it's something interesting to consider. By the way, you can also bypass some paywalls with it. So it's always just add a dot and see what happens. Now, I just want to give you guys a very specific example of this, for which I got a nice bounty. And this report is public, so I can talk about it. So basically, I was testing Shopify as part of a live hacking event, and they had a couple of steps where you could link your own Shopify instance to custom domain. Obviously, whenever you start a shop, you don't want a URL like wholesale shops shopifyapps.com. I mean, you want your own domain, for example, Inti or shop.inti.io. And the only thing they required you to do is set the CNAME, your CNAME of your subdomain, so shop.inti.io, to this wholesale shops shopifyapps.com. And this would allow you within the Shopify app to link your domain, and that would be enough. From the moment you would do this, it would now serve your website. Some very simply steps, but obviously there's some flaws with it. I mean, whenever I have a dangling pointer to this, I can just link my own shop in the UI, and I can essentially take over that domain. I can perform a subdomain takeover. So this is how it looked like whenever you would link your wholesale domain. It now no longer shows anything Shopify. It does show shop.inti.io, and it asks you to sign in. So let's say that we want to we want to link it again. So what if an attacker, so you see this is already linked over here, so I already set it up, and now you would go to Shopify, would go to wholesale preferences and enter my domain for your own store, of course, and you try to link my domain, it will give you an error. It will say, I'm sorry, person on the other side, I cannot do this for you. Why? Of course, because it's already connected to my store and you cannot take the domain name of somebody else. So I was just thinking, what if we just enter shop.intigriti.io instead? Because for the system, it's not the same domain name, but for the DNS, it's actually just the same. I can just make it propagate to the same thing. And this actually worked. So I was able to link you as an attacker have been able to link like the fully qualified domain name for any Shopify domain, wholesale domain out there. And you could just link your own store. So this would be shop.inti.io and this would be shop.inti.io. According to Shopify, these were two different stores and one was not linked, but the CNAME record was also pointing to it. So it said, okay, let me just serve the website on this. In this case, it was my real store. So that is, of course, a problem because now if I could have injected JavaScript on there, I could have just recreated the web page and entered some phishing credentials or phishing like capture, keylogger, whatever. And I could have essentially taken over their accounts and it would still have been on my domain name that was of course still SSL protected, etc. So it was quite an interesting bug. It's also public on HackerOne if you want to have a read. I can see if I can drop the link in the description. There's also a more, if you didn't get the whole part, there's also an explainer video that I made on it. And I got like 3.1k in total just for a simple dot. So it's just a good trick, and I'm sure that there's more of these vulnerable. Then there's also URLs. Domain name is not necessarily URL because a URL also includes the part after the .com, for example. You will see a lot of URLs being used in various web applications. But URLs can be quite funky, and I recently saw this tweet by Badger, which is the author of curl, and he asked us if this is a valid URL. So if you think this is a valid URL, please do let me know something in the comments, because it is a valid URL. So congratulations everybody that thought that this is a valid URL, but I wouldn't say it looks like one. So let's see what this URL is actually made of. First we have a scheme, then we have the user, then we have a password, which is //http// a host, a path, which also contains double slashes, but it doesn't really matter. It's still perfectly valid according to the RFC. Then there's the query parameter, and then there's the hash. And that's it, really. This is a fully functional URL that is completely valid and compliant with the RFC. Now, and I believe Orange Sai has a great talk on this. We won't go too much into depth. We don't have that time. But basically, what is interesting about knowing all of these tricks and knowing how confusing URLs can be is that various URL parsers will also treat them differently. And for example, if you would have an @ symbol over here or maybe over there, one URL parser would think that the URL starts here, whereas in reality, the URL would start there. And maybe other URL parsers would go to the last @ and would take it, which would basically start from here, which would allow you to bypass whitelists or blacklists. So that's always important to consider. And then if you're not dealing with any domain names of URLs, of course, we also have IP addresses. So let's take a look at an IP address and ways to write it. So of course, this IP address can be written in various ways. You can omit some numbers. You can just convert it to hexadecimals, and then of course you can also omit some numbers. There's also of course the IPv6 notations, the hexadecimal notation, etc., etc. I mean, the sky is the limit, and you can also go for the decimal notation. So this is a perfectly valid IP address, and if you're as a system only blocking this, then of course you kind of have a problem because all of them will resolve to the same IP address. So yeah, it's always very good to know, to read the RFC and to see on how many different ways we can write something as simple as an IP address. Same with email addresses, by the way. If we would look at an email address, it looks pretty straightforward, right? We have a local part and a domain, and that's really it. But let's now look at the local part. It's supposed to have, according to the RFC, Latin letters, digits, that's all normal, and dots, but not in front, not in the back, and not in the middle, like two behind each other. But what's quite funky is that it actually allows you to have all of these characters in the email address. So this is a valid email address. And of course, for people, for example, even in Sweden or Norway or in China, they also support UTF-8. Some clients still do not support it, but it doesn't say that it's not a valid email address. So this is also a valid email address, which would, of course, expose us to normalization attacks. And then if we quote the actual part, the local part, we can even do more funky stuff. And we can have an at in there, we can have slashes in there, spacious tabs, and even emojis, which of course, will lead to a various set of payloads, which I will show in a minute. We have also wildcards, so you can use a plus, a minus, and parentheses to get some stuff in there. And then the domain name itself is less funky, there's less flexibility over here. But what is interesting is that you can have IP addresses in there within brackets. This may be used for SSRF. So it's also quite interesting. And of course, this allows you to inject a couple of interesting, or bypass the valid email checker of various web apps and still inject a couple of interesting payloads, such as cross-site scripting, template injection, SQL injection as a ref, but even parameter pollution and header injection. People tend to forget about these, but I found my most critical bugs actually using header injection in email addresses, because of course, if you can get into an SMTP server and make it do fancy stuff, that's kind of where all the good things are. There's actually, like, if you would send this out, this would actually still work in Gmail. So there's like this HTML injection supported by Gmail. You can just try it out, and this would be the email address you would be sending from. Reported it to the Google security team, but it seems to be working as intended. So yeah, it's like a little Easter egg for hackers. If somebody can pop an XSS from it, please go ahead. You can keep the bounty. But other than that, of course, you can bypass some other stuff as well. For example, situations where you have a whitelisted domain name that you have to, still have to receive the email as an attacker, but it's from a company. I mean, it has to end with a company domain that you, of course, are not a part of. And you can try stuff like this, right? Because email parsers, they tend to separate emails with semicolon. So what happens is that, you would try this, which is a valid email address. It would try to send to all the parts. So first to Inti, it doesn't work. Then to Inti at Inti.io, which actually works, and then to the last part, it doesn't work as well. This email would actually arrive, and you would still be able to get in, even though your domain name is not the same as the whitelisted domain name. So yeah, there's that actually. Do note that Slack was not actually vulnerable to this, but it's an example, simply because it's the most known technique where this is used. Something else that piqued my interests are unsubscribe links, because whenever, for example, this is forgive me the subtle product marketing, but emails tend to have like an unsubscribe link, and for some reason, and I didn't know how back in the days, your email client will actually allow you to unsubscribe even without scrolling all the way down. So I was wondering, okay, where do they get this information from? So I looked into the email headers, and I saw that most of these emails would have and this was also part of the RFC, a list and subscribe header, which would allow you to either send an email or send a post request to a certain URL. And then if you would do this, for example, let's say that we would set the list unsubscribe to mail2@ceo.test.com, set a subject, and then a body send money now to whatever. And this is what basically you would see. I mean, the attacker would spam you with stuff and you would try to unsubscribe. Your Gmail client would just be like, okay, I need to send an email to ceo@target.com. This is the subject, this is the body, and it would actually arrive. Now, this was not actually working in Gmail, quite important, but I was trying out some email clients a couple of years ago, and it actually worked. It didn't work in Gmail, but I'm using the same layout as an example. There's also SSRF. Of course, you've seen a URL in the header. So what if instead of an email, we just supply URL and then we click on subscribe? So I'm just putting my Burp collaborator payload over here, or just my own server. And actually, like whenever this person would click on subscribe, the actual email client, again, it was not Gmail, would send this ping back to my server, which was quite cool. And then one last example to finish with: phone numbers. I haven't really talked about this technique a lot. I'm still exploring, but feel free to do your own research and use it for bug bounty purposes as well. We all think telephone numbers look like this, right? You start with a global kind of call country ID, and then you have the local number. Pretty straightforward. A lot of applications use them. But then I went to read the RFC. And it turns out there's a lot of additional parameters you can add to it. You can supply the extension like after it. And you can have like phone context. Like it's meant for really old systems, but many email validators will still take care of these parameters, and they will still allow them. So you can also supply some service code. So it's whenever you would call like a service line, and you would be asked to dial a couple of options, then you can basically already dial them as you're calling the number to speed things up. So a lot of people don't know this, so naturally I was looking for ways to kind of abuse it, and I was starting with this one because this one obviously can include some Latin characters. And first I was like, hey, maybe we can let me just try to like verify this phone number and see if it actually would arrive. And it would actually arrive. So I would try to, and this is my own phone number. I should probably have redacted that, but fuck it, just don't call me. Basically I was able to get some confirmation codes in. So this was actually a valid email address, and the service would actually confirm my email address, which was quite cool. But then again, what if instead of this, your confirmed email address, the one that you got a code for actually contains a cross-site scripting payload? This is an example of an actual website, and it kind of worked. You can get cross-site scriptings in valid phone numbers. Also SSRF, because this thing is actually supposed to contain a domain name, and then some old systems may do, I haven't really seen a GET lookup yet, but some old systems may do a DNS lookup for some reason. But more interestingly, and this can lead to account takeover, is OTP spraying / brute force. This behavior happens whenever you get a couple of attempts to get like a password reset code per phone number. But if you can always get like a different phone number, but the backend will convert it to the original phone number, for example, using some common libraries that also include this flaw, then this can lead to account takeover. Let's say that you are in a scenario, this is the victim's phone number, and you're in a scenario that you kind of want to get their password reset code. It gets sent as a text message to their phone number, but of course you can't really know what the code is. But still, you wanna reset their passwords. So one of the things that you can do is you could technically, like, first thing every hunter would do is try all the codes, or try to just submit a lot of the same, like do this over and over and over again. Try the same code every single time, and then just pray and spray and hope that one day you will hit the right code. But most of these systems will just lock you out. And then you have to wait for 10 minutes and then maybe 30 minutes. This also prevents some higher bills on their side. But let's say that, I'm trying to get to guess the OTP that was sent to my phone number, which is this phone number. After 4 minutes or 4 attempts, I get a block for 10 minutes. We can easily bypass this for some systems and eventually reach account takeover. Let's say that we have the same, but not really the same phone number, so my phone number plus an extension added to it, and just try it over and over and over again. So we can get a fourth, fifth, sixth request. Then we get another phone number that is also resolving to my account on the back end, 789, and we kind of automate this until we are able to kind of test all of the potential codes. Of course, we can also test the same code every single time, but this really shows you that per email, per phone number, you can just test it, and whenever the backend kind of normalizes it and also relates to your account, but still the blocking procedure is done on a string basis and doesn't really consider this, you can just do zero-click account takeover by abusing these very easily, and you'd be surprised how many systems still support it. So after a while, you will find the correct code, and you'll be able to log in and reset the password. Obviously, there's also stuff like buffer overflow. There were some spoofing vulnerabilities. So for example, where you supply the local number here, and then the first, like in a parameter pollution attack, the first one would be like this would be a Dutch phone number, and this would be a Belgian phone number. But then one system would see it as a Dutch phone number, the other system would see it as a Belgian phone number. Some scenarios you would be able to, if somebody with exactly the same local phone number but a different country code signed up, you would be able to take on their account by the system accidentally taking the wrong parameter and sending the password reset code to your account. So, I mean, feel free to hunt for this. I've seen it walking in a lot of interesting, like Fortune 500 companies. They fixed some of it already, but yeah, feel free to test for it and let me know how it goes. Always happy to do more research on it. But it's just an example. I found this when I was preparing for this talk. So it really shows that the moment you start researching some RFCs, you can actually find some great stuff with it. Thank you so much for attending this 30-minute talk, and do not forget to follow us on Twitter and Mastodon. Thank you.
Thank you, Inti. And the best part is, Inti is now here in person to answer your questions. Let me bring Inti on stage. First of all, you were not well, but you still made time for this live Q&A.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. We are really, really
Thank
grateful.
yeah. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Sorry, my voice is not 100%, but I really appreciate all the love I've been getting in the chat, and I hear that there's some questions. So I'm very happy to answer any questions people may have about anything. It can be about the talk, it can be about bug bounty, it can be about integrity. Whatever you guys have a question, I will try to answer.
Please drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. Okay. So we have a question by Bhavesh. The question is, can you describe the process for submitting an RFC and how it is reviewed and approved by the IETF?
I could, but I technically never did it. So I'm not like an RFC author. I wish I will become one day. But there's this amazing person, and I do want to give him a shout out. I will just link his website over here. It's called AdOverflow, and that's the guy who invented, who came up with the idea of having a security.txt file. So he went through the whole process. I think it took around 2 years. Obviously, it kind of starts with a draft, and then you have to submit it, and then people will look at it. And there's like a lot of stages of peer reviews, and you will get a lot of comments, maybe about very minor things, maybe about things that maybe you have overlooked. And when that whole process is done, then the EITF, they have a workforce for it. They will make a final decision, but these things take ages. So if you have an idea for an RFC right now and you write it right now, maybe it will be published in maybe 2025 or something. So you gotta have some patience. I see that there's another question in the chat as well. Have you tried using phone numbers as an attack for uh, vector on services that use Twilio API? I have tested Twilio. I have not tested the API, however. So feel free after this talk to go ahead and test it. I think that Twilio does not use, like for their main website at least, they do not use or they had some filtering against it essentially, so it was not possible to get any bugs out of it. But I have seen it with other system as well. So feel free to test for it, especially like the what is most common is cross-site scripting, because if they just allow use a library, for example, one of the vulnerable libraries where it still works is lib phone number. That is the official library by Google. So a lot of companies implement it. And if you see a lib phone number somewhere, um, and they just do the is possible or is valid phone number verification on it, then you may be able to get like blind accesses, etc. All the other ones are less common, but I would certainly look for stuff like account takeover whenever they block on the exact match of a phone number. Let's say that you try to get an OTP code for somebody and it blocks you out maybe after 10 attempts, then try changing a parameter and see if they are blocking the direct thing, because otherwise you can just always change the parameter and get like account takeover in maybe 20 minutes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Inti, for that answer. We have another question by Reda. Which bugs are still easy to find without needing to go too deep in bug bounties?
Yeah, great question. It really depends what your background is. What is easy for me is maybe not always easy for somebody else. And again, like if you look at people like Franz Rosen, he was giving a talk yesterday that just blew my mind, and I would never be able to find that. So I think it kind of depends on your base level, but it's always good to look in places um, where others don't look. If you're looking for like simple bugs like cross-site scripting or things that are quite obvious, everybody's looking for it, right? So either you focus on VDPs, but of course you want bug bounties. So what I want to do, if you just have basic knowledge about vulnerability types and do not want to dig too deep in the code, is to just make very complex setups. For example, if you're testing something with an integration, try and go set up that whole integration, because most bug bounty hunters will not do this. And then usually there's a couple of bugs to be found over there, even easy ones, because most bug bounty hunters, in honesty, they will test the search bar, they will test whatever functionalities they can find on the main page. But maybe take some time extra, read the documentation, and the documentation will tell you about maybe some hidden features, and there may be some very, very easy bugs in there. I always start with the documentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Inti. So another question we have by Said Nuruddin. If company has loop in RFC, then can we directly report it or we have to exploit for bug bounty?
Um,
Loop.
if just to make sure that I understand, so an RFC actually there's it's
Loophole.
very rare that you have a vulnerability in an RFC. It can happen, but it's quite rare. What really happens most of the times is that a company wrongly implements the RFC. So they will be like, they interpret it a certain way, or they maybe not read it in full. But also, like, for example, for emails, it just allows cross-site scripting payloads. Like valid email addresses can have cross-site scripting payloads. That's just compliant with the RFC. So if you, as an organization, just say, okay, we will just have any RFC compliant email and then not properly sanitize these emails because nobody thinks you will have a cross-site scripting payload and an email address, then it's the company's fault, and then you can report it directly. The cool thing is about finding stuff in RFCs or common misconfigurations of RFCs is that most people, if you find something like a trick like that, you can just go and shop on all the separate bug bounty programs, and they will have to pay you a bounty for every single finding. It's not like there. it can be patched at one go. A 0 day may be patched and then it's ineligible for bug bounty. But these are not 0 days; these are just bugs. So once you find something, you can maybe earn a couple of hundreds of bounties with it.
That is so cool. Another question we have by Reda. Which types of programs do you prefer hunting on?
A very good question. I personally I like emails and ticketing systems because of the logics. It's I personally also like working on programs that maybe I'm a customer of myself, because then I can check if my own data is secure. That's always very interesting, very cool. And then web applications, but web applications with the challenge, not like just the web application where you have some update or delete functionalities. I do want like maybe a very exotic PDF renderer, or maybe something that loads all types of data from certain sources and then combines it and then does something funky with it. Because I know that if you have like very special features like that, um, and you find a bug in it, it's much more rewarding than just popping another cross-site scripting. So yeah, I tend to go for that.
That's so nice. Thanks for sharing, Inti. The next question is from Samuel. What challenges have you faced in bug hunting, and how did you
Yeah.
overcome them? I'm also
Oh, good question.
combining this with another question by Sahil. How to become a pro like you? So please share your story, Inti.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start off with a maybe something that is reassuring for some people. If I go back and look at my very first reports, and I started bug bounty hunting more than 10 years ago, they were the worst reports. They were like, I would get closed as an A, as informative. I would be reporting self cross-site scripting because I didn't know what self cross-site scripting was. I was just copy pasting payloads and hoping for something to pop. But then it was easier to find bugs. Now there's much more competition from other bug bounty hunters, so in a way it's become harder. But the true answer is things take time, and I figured that once I understood the bug, and especially I understood what the companies were looking for, I would spend much less time trying to explain myself or trying to convince companies to accept something. I just put more time into finding something that they're really looking for, and then maybe instead of $100 bounty, I would be getting maybe $1,000 bounty, because that was really something that they wanted to. So it's like trial and error. You kind of learn along the way. Also, I hated duplicates, so I was like, I need to find some stuff that other people don't test for. And then I really live hacking events and just asking people, hey, what are you currently doing? And you take their answer and you do the complete opposite. So you don't go looking. Many people make the mistakes of all looking for the same thing. Don't do this. Try to find your own way. And and I think that's the reason why I have almost never gotten any substantial duplicates, because I just read the documentation, I do my own thing, and yeah, that is, once you kind of get your own technique, that is something. It makes bug bounty more enjoyable, but also more profitable. And everybody will think you're an expert, and the reality is you're just reading the documentation. Everybody that can read can be a pro like me. Just take your time and read the documentation and make sure you understand it.
That is so inspiring to hear. Thank you for sharing that. We have a lovely follow up question to this by Samuel. How have strategies in becoming a successful hunter changed over the years?
um Also, I mean, very very good questions here. Like I said, I think now there's more competition. I think that's the most important part. But also, more and more companies are trying bug bounty. So for some people may have so much choice in programs that it's also becoming more difficult for them. When I started, there were maybe 10 programs that people would hunt on, and everybody was talking about the same programs, and you could really go deep. Um, I think what is important right now, rather than in the beginning, is to set some rules for yourself. Just pick out a program. Many people like wildcard scopes, but I personally I don't like wildcard scopes. Why? Because it gives you too much choice, and whenever you don't find something right away, you just move on. So you only kind of scratch the surface. I like to force myself. Okay, Inti, you are now going to work for the next 8 hours on this subdomain, and even if you don't find anything, you don't give up. And maybe after 7.5 hours, I will find something, and then I keep on hacking all night, and I get a nice bug in the morning. So yeah, I think it's right now there's just too much choice, and you have to be strict for yourself, but also make sure that you hack on companies and platforms that value your time. There's so many companies out there that maybe don't have the best payouts, or don't have teams that will properly award. So of course, big bounty platforms can help you with it, but I try to send in something, see how they respond, and if I get a fair payout and maybe a bonus, then I will just continue on there. And I would also advise to stick to one program for a really long time. Pick one program; it can be your darling. Pick one program out, hunt on it, don't hunt on any other program. um, and you may get invited to the live hacking events because you're first on the leaderboard. You may be getting additional love or swag from the team, and after a couple of months, you will be starting to get the really interesting bugs, not just the cross-site scriptings, but like the very deep bugs that are super interesting to the team. And then they will try to hire you, but say no, keep on doing bug bounty, because you will earn more money with bug bounty than to go work for them.
That is so inspiring and such a nice mindset shift you suggested, the never give up attitude. If one can learn to adopt that, I think success becomes easy to them in any field. Uh, so Inti, our Q&A time is up, but we have a few more questions. Is it okay? Like, could you take a few more questions now?
Sure, yeah, no worries.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the next question is by Avishek. Any particular research techniques you use while learning about a new bug type?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite stupid. I have a list of things that I, even in the documentation and in the RFCs, I have a list of words that I will just scan for. Um, I don't read the whole thing usually, because these things are just some of these things are just like technical details that you don't really need to know about. But I will tend to look for things like import, parameter, tool, um, and stuff like that. I have this whole list of words that I will be just searching or grabbing through. So what I can do is I just download all the possible RFCs. You can just iterate them. It's just numbers, right? So you just always increment the numbers. You download them to your computer, and then you just do grep, and you search for something like parameter or optional, especially optional, because it's kind of there. People will be implementing it, but possibly also not. Or like things like connection, especially important for SSRF. Um, Alphanumeric, because it may indicate that people can put a payload in there. So I have this whole word, and I just grab for it, and I think that's the best technique that I mean, most fruitful, because I found out about the phone number thing while I was preparing for this talk. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this talk, and I just grabbed for. I'm not sure what exactly I grabbed for, but like the phone number RFC was the first result, and I was like, yeah, let's just read this one, and I got some nice bugs as a result.
That's so nice. Next question is by Mr. Rutsek. Which vulnerabilities you get to triage at Intigriti, mostly like injections or info disclosure, etc. Do you think working as a triager will get you a lot of good attack vectors and techniques?
Yeah, so this is actually a misconception. Many people want to become a triager to learn, and I get that. But triagers also need to be very ethical, and especially towards other hackers. You cannot really, once you see a new technique, you cannot really use it for your own bug bounty purposes, because it wouldn't be fair, right? If you as a hacker would report something to a platform, and then you see a triager, and it happened before at other platforms, a triager will start to report it and make money of it. I don't think that's. I mean, the triager in our case would not no longer have a job at Intigriti. So yeah, I for me myself, I try to avoid actually looking at reports. There's a whole procedure if I need access to a report, because I do the more complex mediation. So sometimes I get to see reports, but make maybe one or two a week, and that's it. And I even don't really try to look at the techniques, because when you're running a bug bounty program, or platform, people may start to associate their research with your own, and that is something that I really want to take separately, because I want to do my own research, I want to do my hacking, but I also very much want to have respect for intellectual property of hackers. So yeah, that is something you will need to learn to overcome if you want to become a triager.
Thanks for a very amazing perspective. The last question, Inti, is a combination of two questions by Jelly and Vikas. What do you think the future of bug hunting due to upcoming AI and automation tools after 5 to 8 years? Will AI and automation replace most common bugs?
Um, Also a very good question. I personally think that things will change for sure, um, but I think it may focus us on more creativity. um, I tried to interact with the chat, and I still noticed, even though it has a lot of info, for example, I tried to ask it about the phone number thing that I discovered. Like, hey, is there a way to put like parameters in phone numbers? And even though the RFC is out there, the chat bot didn't read the RFC. So it was like, no, 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 phone numbers can only contain 10 digits. So it wouldn't have come up with this technique, for example. The AI wouldn't know about this. But then also this weekend, I wrote a recon tool simply by making I had this ID, but I didn't want to code it. So I was like, hey, can you please do this and this and this and integrate with these APIs? And the AI just wrote it for me. And I run it on my computer and it just worked. I was getting some bugs because of it. So I think it's actually, I mean, it can be pretty cool for bug bounty hunters, because it's the tiresome jobs will probably go away. You no longer have to code your own recon tool. I think that's the future. But again, then you can focus on, how can I have a better tool than maybe my competitor hackers? And I think that is something that personally excites me. So yeah, I'm very positive about the future.
Thank you, Inti, for that interesting perspective. And thank you so much for making time for this live Q&A. The questions our audience asked were really interesting, and thank you so much for answering them as well.
No worries. Very happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Inti. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. So that was Inti answering the live Q&A for you. Hope you had a great time in this talk. The next talk that is going to start in about 7 minutes is by Admin Poner Asan. So definitely go and attend. That's going to be the last talk for this day. Thank you so much, dear people, whoever is watching. You've been a great audience. Thank you for the amazing questions. And see you in the last talk. Bye.